This is an example of adultification. You become your parent's emotional spouse and emotional caretaker, almost like a friend. And that's really messed up because in this situation, you might have even felt special, trusted, and mature. But what you're actually going through was being taught that your job is to hold space for your parents as much as they were holding space for yours. And as a result, you might start to think that, oh, my mom is going through so much already. Does me bringing up what I'm going through make me a good child? Yes or no? So lately I've been noticing that there's a pattern among Asian adults, especially those from immigrant families. On the surface, they're doing well. They're competent, reliable, highly responsible, and most of the time they're the one that everyone else that turns to at work or in their families to get things done and take care of business. But underneath that, there's often a very specific kind of exhaustion that you may have noticed. Not just from doing too much and being busy, but often from a deeper fatigue of always feeling like they're not doing enough, no matter how much they're doing. I find that when I talk to a lot of Asian adults, they talk about this feeling of being responsible for other people's stress. They often step in before, anyone else is actually asking them to. They struggle to relax when someone else around them is feeling overwhelmed. And they're oftentimes great in crisis, but also oddly uncomfortable when nothing is wrong. It's almost like their system is looking for something to go wrong. So even when things are going well, there's this constant background pressure to do more, be more, act more, to anticipate problems before they happen. Now, psychology research on Asian and Asian American families has actually documented these patterns. What they found is that studies on immigrant households show higher rates of what's called early role responsibility and emotional caretaking in children. And they found that these exact patterns that show up in anxiety, hypervigilance, over-functioning oftentimes continue well into adulthood by the time that these Asian kids are now in their 30s or 40s. They're still carrying that on. So to understand why so many Asian adults carry this invisible weight, we dive deeper to look at what was actually required of them before they were ever given a choice. Adultification happens when the parent-child relationships is flipped upside down. Most family dynamics, the parent is supposed to serve a number of very important roles. One is being the person to provide all the child's physical and emotional needs. In Asian families, we tend to talk about this from the physical first. I'm making enough money for you. I'm giving you food. I'm providing you a roof over your head. But of course, that's only the first level role that a parent is supposed to provide. The deeper level role that a parent is supposed to also provide is the emotional support for a child. That is giving emotional guidance, emotional support, unconditional love, and basically being the child's emotional center. Because when you're a child, you have no real ability to understand or regulate your emotional needs. You're not sure exactly what it is that you should be scared of or freaked out about. So as a result, you look to your parents for everything. And the idea is that as a kid, your job is to be a kid, have fun, enjoy yourself, and most importantly, learn what it means to become an adult. Your job is to learn how to regulate your own emotional experiences, but not your parents'. But here's where it starts going wrong, especially for parents who are considered emotionally immature. So this term, emotional immaturity, was developed by Dr. Lindsay Gibson, a psychologist who literally wrote the book on emotionally immature parents. And she talks about this concept of role reversal, where oftentimes in children dynamic with their parents, especially when their caregiver is not in the most ideal state, or oftentimes for immigrant families, where the parent has to go and do so many other things that they can no longer be a full-time parent to their children. And the child instead becomes a caregiver to the parent instead. So we're going to use an example. Let's say that we're talking about a child who is 6 or 7 years old. She outlines two main types of adultification. The first is called instrumental adultification. That's the visible stuff. paying bills, translating documents, managing household logistics, basically doing tasks that most adults will be taking care of in their own everyday lives. The second type of emotional adultification is a little bit sneakier. This is called emotional adultification. It's when a child is expected to become their parent's friend, therapist, their confidant, and their emotional support system. This often happens when a parent is struggling to find emotional calmness or oftentimes takes it out, their anxiety and uncertainty, on their child when they're not feeling like they're in a safe or secure place. This oftentimes comes out as outbursts, comparisons, this kind of endless like you're not enough because the parent themselves are struggling. Sometimes this might also end up with a child becoming kind of like a marriage counselor, oftentimes as young as, 6 or 7 years old. In these situations, the child becomes the one who becomes absorbent of all of their anxieties, things about like money or immigration status, family drama overseas. When I was watching the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once, this was actually a really well-developed example where the child is playing multiple different roles in the parent's relationship. The first one is, of course, the child plays a translator role, helping the parent take care of their difficult IRS problems. The child also takes on an emotional caretaker role, however, by hiding elements of her relationship from her parents so as to not add additional stress to the parent's relationship with her own father. Now, if you grew up in an immigrant family, there's also a cultural amplifier that's on top of all this. Because oftentimes in immigrant families, the parents are not just emotionally immature, they were literally in actual survival mode. And what this means is that their basis of survival, things like navigating jobs, income, the difficulties of a new country, the difficulties of the rules there, language there, dealing with language barriers and even cultural barriers, all of these things then are falling to the child's role to take care of. They become the translator, the emotional caretaker, as well as a cultural interpreter who is there to build the relationship. This might look like being able to translate at the doctor's office because no one else could, and perhaps even being the person to remind the parent to take their medication, go to see the doctor, making sure that they're taking care of themselves. Or maybe the child was the one who had to take care of the school system because their parents simply don't understand it. Stuff like, making sure that documents were signed or, report cards were read over and that, whatever additional parts are there. But here's where it gets even more complicated, especially for Asian families. There's a concept of filial piety. Filial piety basically comes down to respect and care for your parents. Now, this is, generally speaking, a really good thing. After all, it's not like Western cultures don't talk about the same importance. But in Asian cultures, it often is so much bigger because there's the concept of a collectivist family. In a collectivist family, your parents are not just seen as someone you should respect because they're your parents. They actually become the spiritual center of a household because they're the ones holding everyone else together. So there's a sense of like anytime that you're perhaps even disagreeing with your parents, it starts to feel like a form of disrespect, as if you're betraying them simply for having your own feelings, having your own needs, and having what your own opinions are. In these kind of situations, the child's role starts to become much more complex because it stops being just about making sure that you're providing for your parents' expectations when they're asking, but rather anticipating your parents' needs before they even ask, which oftentimes means that any kind of needs that you have in that dynamic becomes a burden. You start learning that being a good child means erasing your needs entirely or hiding them so that you're not adding more inconvenience and burden to your parents' already heavy plates. And that's even without talking about the complexities of saving face. When it comes to saving face, that is actually not just about reputation. It means that what you do are a reflection of your parents' identity. I mean, perhaps you've heard of the term, what will other people say in your family where you're making your own life decisions? I want to date this person, or I want to go and do this thing, pursue this job, or even seek counseling, become a discussion of, but what will other friends of ours start to view us when it comes to your parents' roles? These kind of things are much more complex because that means that your emotions and your needs are no longer just about you. You're actually protecting the family image to the outside world. Where this gets really complicated is that this makes it that much harder for you to get the support you might need as a regular human going through regular human experiences, because at this point, any kind of dysfunction you're experiencing has to be hidden to make like everything looks fine on the outside and to always seem like you're the competent one who has everything all together. Because if you don't, again, it may feel like you're actually not just bringing struggles to yourself, but you're shaming your entire family. So here's an example. Maybe your mom, would vent to you about how your dad never helps out around the house. You're 12 years old and you're nodding along and you're trying to make her feel better by offering advice or suggestions, or even just telling her that, she's not wrong about what she needs. After all, in that situation, you might agree. This is an example of adultification. You become your parent's emotional spouse and emotional caretaker, almost like a friend. And that's really messed up because in this situation, you might have even felt special, trusted, and mature in this situation. But what you're actually going through was being taught that your job is to hold space for your parents as much as they were holding space for yours. And as a result, you might start to think that, oh, my mom is going through so much already. Does me bringing up what I'm going through make me a good child? Yes or no? I found that this is particularly difficult for eldest daughters or the oldest children in general in Asian families, because oftentimes if you're the oldest child, you often also become the third parent. You're not just there to raise yourself, you're there to raise your younger siblings. You're often handling things like household administration. You're the emotional mediator when your parents are having a fight. If your younger siblings are having a fight, then it's also your job to make sure that they're also calm and taken care of. Oftentimes I see these in Asian families where the eldest daughter is 10 years old and is already basically a small housewife operating as if they're running a household. That's not a personality trait, nor is this even a good thing. What we're dealing with it is actually a survival adaptation that oftentimes comes at the cost of their childhood. Now, if you're listening to this and you're going, well, what was wrong with that? Many of my friends or many people grew up this way and they were all fine. And that's where the myth of the high performer really comes into play. So let's clear up something right now. You can absolutely have grown up being that kid where you're just extra emotionally mature. Everyone says things like, I never had to worry about him or her when I was growing up. I never had to... Where your parents might have said things like, I'm so happy and I'm so proud of you. I never had to worry about you. You took care of all your own school stuff. You took care of your own grades. You took care of the family. Sometimes I felt like you were raising me. Now, there's a massive difference between healthy high performance and over-functioning, especially when we're dealing with adulthood. Healthy high performance happens when you choose to excel because you're genuinely excited or caring about something. Hey, I just wanted to let you know that Big Asian Energy is officially out and you can go and pick it up anywhere you buy books, Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, etc. If you've ever felt like there's something stopping you from reaching your full potential, if you've ever felt like you want to have that unstoppable charisma and confidence in the work that you do, as well as just the way you show up in life, this might be the book for you. It is a book that is jam-packed with research studies, advice, case studies, stories, and of course, so many different techniques and takeaways, including communication, as well as mindset, as well as confidence, and all the other topics out there. It just won one of the best books of 2025 on Amazon. So if you haven't checked it out yet, go take a look. And finally, if you have a few seconds, can I also ask you to leave a quick review for Big Asian Energy? It not only means the world to us to hear from you, but more importantly, it does absolutely help us in reaching more audiences. I hope you're having an amazing day, and thanks again. On the other hand, there's a concept called over-functioning. And over-functioning comes out of a sense of compulsion, almost like the sense of if I'm not over-performing at any given time, then I must be underperforming. It often comes with extreme anxiety, stress, and oftentimes lead to things like burnout or depression. And this is not about excellence. This is about understanding how that anxiety system comes in. Because if you're performing well because you love something, then great. But if you're performing well because you feel like if I don't, something terrible is going to happen, chances are that feeling is going to drive you to actually underperform despite the fact that you're over functioning. This shows up in what I oftentimes call either the fixer archetype or the commander archetype. The fixer archetype is oftentimes somebody who is constantly in a state of emotional caretaking or even to a certain degree, people pleasing. Someone mentions that they're stressed about a project and they immediately will feel this spike of anxiety in their chest, or they'll suddenly find the need to go and help and save this person to the best of their ability. Now, that might sound great, but you'll notice that this actually goes on to a little bit more extremes. Like, for example, if that person then goes and says, I don't think I need help right now, there's often a sense of disappointment or even anger when they're not able to get that I get to help you need met. And oftentimes before the person is even finished explaining the problem, the other person is already jumping into solving it, sometimes volunteering to help without the other person agreeing on it. And this often seems like offering resources, taking on tasks, and kind of pushing on like I'm going to help you whether you like it or not. And this comes oftentimes not because the person is generous, but because there is a sense of this is my role and I'm safe when I get to be this person taking care of everyone else around me. And this leads not just to burnout, but a sense that if I'm not burning myself out, am I even being a good person? And that discomfort starts to grow and grow and grow and starts to become the only reason we see ourselves as valuable. Think about like this. When you see somebody in distress, is your nervous system interpreting it in the same way it did when you were a kid watching your parents fall apart? So, for example, if mom back then was upset, their whole world felt unsafe. So you learned to put aside all your needs to fix their needs immediately. Now, as an adult, if your coworker becomes stressed or your friend is having a hard time, maybe your system starts ringing the same alarm bells. I have to go fix it. I have to go take care of it. I have to make sure that they're fine because, well, if I don't, then who am I at that point? So we start to learn how to regulate our own nervous system by regulating somebody else's. And then there's the concept of hyper-independence, which is really just the flip side of the same coin. It oftentimes comes out when people feel like they can't ask for help or they don't even know where to start. There's this feeling that it's not that I don't want to ask for help, it's just that I've been so used to taking care of all of my own needs that asking for help seems counterintuitive or even dangerous. It feels like if I'm asking for help, I'm asking for too much, I'm taking too much, and I'm never going to be able to properly pay off that emotional debt of receiving help. And when this happens, oftentimes it's a mirroring of the same effect that we learned when we were children. We learned that having needs made us a burden. It made us an inconvenience to other people. So now, as an adult, you might rather burn out entirely on your own. And I hear this all the time when people say, I'll ask for help once I figured it out or once I've, kind of like taken care of it, which is like, okay, but that defeats the purpose. But it becomes a situation where we become so used to burning out that we'd rather burn out than ask someone else to share the load. And usually in these kind of situations, I see people burning out straight to the ground before they'll admit that they can't handle something alone. Literally for myself, I was actually hospitalized before I was realizing that, oh my gosh, I literally can't do this alone, nor am I supposed to. Now let's talk about anticipatory anxiety. Anticipatory anxiety is basically what happens when our baseline systems are always at a slice scale of kind of like bells going off. We're constantly scanning the room. And this is something that I constantly hear from people when they almost brag about it. They're like, I'm really good at reading people. I'm really good at, reading people's micro expressions, monitoring tone shifts. And I'm like, great, that is a really powerful skill. I wonder if there was any adultification that happened in your childhood where you've had to learn on these very helpful adaptations to learn how to read and predict emotional outbursts because perhaps there were people who often had emotional unstable states when you were young. But as a result, you learn how to mitigate them really early. And that might be a situation where when you were young, you walked into a family dinner and you've already kind of assessed before sitting down who's feeling tense, who's going to start an argument, and what do you need to do to keep the peace. So unfortunately, this isn't just emotional intelligence. It's a cool skill, but there's another term for it, which is hypervigilance. It's a nervous system that's learned safety from being 3 steps ahead of everyone else's emotions. And what this creates, unfortunately, is a resentment cycle. A resentment cycle comes when you're out there and you're volunteering to do things for everyone. And then after a while, you suddenly realize you're burning out and you're sitting there thinking, wait a second, why am I the one who's doing everything? Why doesn't everybody else do something that for me? Instead, why am I carrying everyone else's burden? And oftentimes, you also notice these people when they start going through this process, they might start asking themselves and go, and actually, did people ask me for help, or at least ask me for the degree of help that I showed up for? So this creates a deeper resentment because it's a signal that tells you that your boundaries have completely collapsed. You've taken on responsibilities that were never yours, and now you're angry that no one else is meeting that same expectation and need. But the difficulty of this is that oftentimes in this situation, no one ever asked for you to do all this. You volunteered because there was the feeling that if nobody else did it, then nobody else would do it. It feels more dangerous to let things be undone than just taking care of it themselves. So in these situations, we often tell ourselves that we're being the good people. We're the ones who are caring. We're the ones who are responsible. And everyone else seems to let me down constantly. Why does everyone else let me down when I'm doing so much for everyone else? But what is actually happening isn't that you're being let down. What is actually happening is self-erasure. What you're doing is you're managing your own fear of conflict or abandonment by making yourself indispensable. And if you think that you're useful enough, then people won't leave, and that you're competent enough, no one would ever be disappointed by you. And if you anticipate every single need of every single person around you, then no one would ever be upset with you. But that's not real care. That's a survival strategy that many of us learned when we were too young to know the difference. And we simply carry that on into our adulthood. And chances are pretty good that it's sabotaging many of our relationships, from our familial relationships to even our marriages. So how do we go from here? The goal here is to move from reactive fixing to a responsive choice. Because right now, your default mode is on autopilot. Someone has a problem and you solve it. In fact, you look for problems to solve. And what we need to do is we need to interrupt that pattern to create space for you. And what we need to do is to interrupt that pattern to actually create space for you to choose whether this thing is actually for you to carry, or if in fact you're letting somebody else down by not letting them carry it for themselves. This is particularly the case I find with, again, that elder children or, elder sibling dynamic, where they oftentimes go into this enabling state where they're so used to picking up their younger siblings' responsibilities that then their younger siblings actually lose the opportunity to learn to be self-sufficient, to guide their own path. And oftentimes this also means that the older child or the older sibling is so used to imposing their systems, their beliefs, and their opinions on younger children, on their younger siblings, that their actual younger siblings also go through their own form of self-erasure in just trying to meet your older siblings' expectations, essentially repeating that same pattern and codependency. The first tool that I found really helpful is just pausing. It's a stupidly simple but incredibly important thing. Whenever somebody presents a problem and you feel that familiar urge to jump in and fix it, what you're going to do is say nothing except just listening for 10 seconds. In fact, count to 10 in your head and let the silence just sit there. Because this is going to do 2 things for you. It gives the other person the space to think through their own problems, because they might be waiting for you to respond and continue to talk about it. And more importantly, it gives you time to notice in your physiology, in your body, to calm down. Because that instinct that you feel, that desire to go and help somebody else and go and take care of their problems, is actually coming from a feeling of anxiety or a feeling of joy where you're feeling like, I get to see myself shine. I get to have this. And what we want to do for either of those is to just let us settle for a second and wait until the other person is actually able to come to an answer or maybe even ask. But more importantly, you want to let your system calm down and self-regulate and be able to ask, is this mine to fix? Am I being invited to fix somebody else's problems? And if so, have I negotiated what that would look like yet? Because until you've actually done that, helping people oftentimes isn't really about helping them, but about helping you. Now, let's talk about this concept called differentiation. So differentiation is a psychology concept that basically means recognizing that you are a separate entity from your family unit. This was originally developed by family therapist Murray Bowen, who developed the theory as the sense of like not just individuation, which is how you build who you are, your own identity, your own value system, your own needs system, what you're really excited by, what your path is, but actually creating a sense of self while still remaining emotionally connected with others. The difference is you're just not responsible for managing other people's emotions and needs. You are not responsible for preventing every conflict that somebody else may have. You're not responsible for making sure that everyone's okay at all times because they're adults and they're physically capable of solving that problem themselves. And even if not, that doesn't make your responsibility. Your parents' marriage problems, not your responsibility. Your siblings' life choices, not your responsibility. Your mom's anxiety about what it is that the relatives will think, not your responsibility. So here are some actual scripts that you can use. The first one works really well for professional settings or general relationships. And it just goes, yeah, I can see this is really stressful for you. And how would you like to handle it? When you do that, you're acknowledging their struggle without taking it on. And you're handing the responsibility to take care of it back to them by asking them, how would you like to handle this? And if their response is, I don't know, how would you like to handle it? Your response might be, well, let's brainstorm. What do you think makes the most sense here? And each of these questions' purpose is to give the responsibility, that onus, back to them. Now, if they're actually asking you and saying, actually, I don't know what to do, can I get your advice on this? Then give them the advice or give them your opinion or your suggestion. But what's really important is that we titrate the degrees. And what I mean by that is that the first stage should never be, let me go and do it for you. At no point should that ever be the case unless the other person is so truly physically incapable that out of care, you're negotiating what that looks like. And that usually means that you're not just saying yes to everything. That usually means that you say things like, okay, tell you what, I can come in and help you out by doing this, this, and this, but only until this point and only if you listen or learn or to help yourself. So next time it happens, you know how to take care of it. If we can't do that, then I don't think I can help you. Is that okay? This is really important because that way when you're actually delivering the help, you're checking in as to the boundaries that you set. And if at any point the boundaries aren't met, let's say you start helping your little brother with his schoolwork and halfway through suddenly he disappears to go play video games. At that point, let them know, hey, our agreement was that I would help you if you're present and learning how. Since you're now playing video games, I'm going to stop. And then beyond that, it's not your responsibility. As a matter of fact, what you're doing in that moment is you're teaching them personal responsibility, which probably a pretty good thing to learn. The second script I will offer is for family dynamics, especially if you're being pulled into the middle of conflicts. And you can say things like, yeah, that sounds really hard. And, I want to support you as your daughter. I can't obviously be in the middle of your argument with dad. So is there anything that you want, like me to give you advice on? And oftentimes when you're doing something like this, you might get a little pushback, especially if up until now, your role has been the emotional caretaker and they expect you to continue. But what's really important to know is that just because they've had it in the past and just because they're expecting it doesn't mean that you have to meet it. You can change the agreement at any time. You can just say that, yeah, in the past I've always done this, but moving forward, honestly, I've been a little bit tired and I'm dealing with my own things right now, so I'm not really available for it. Or in my own personal opinion, my preference will be don't give a reason. Just say, I'm not really available for it. Because they also need to learn that there's no reason that they have to negotiate. Otherwise, they're going to come back and they'll say, well, you have so much time and you have so much resources and things are going well for you. You're just being selfish. And usually at that point, I would just say, okay, that is a hang up word, right? Like usually I'm just saying, like anytime somebody is saying that I'm being selfish, I'm like, okay, did you listen to the point? Do you agree that they're selfish? No, then great. That's emotional manipulation. I'm not going to sit for it. And that's okay. But what's really important in setting a boundary is that you can still express care because you're not actually rejecting them. You're still offering to help if that help is received in the way that you're willing to support them. But you're rejecting the role that they're trying to assign to you, which doesn't really happen without your consent. And this is why it is a third script, which is about delegation, is so important, which is, I don't think I can take this on right now, but maybe somebody else can help. Who do you think can handle this? Or just say, I don't really have the time or capacity for this right now, and without justification, because your bandwidth is your bandwidth. And generally speaking, again, when people push back on your boundaries, a simple thing you can just say is, yeah, I can totally see why it is that you'd be disappointed because I've done this before in the past, but I just don't have the availability anymore and I still can't do this. And in this situation, you're not defending yourself. You're not explaining, in fact, you're just restating the boundary. And then finally, if you've been going through this, I invite you to take a moment and close your eyes. Literally, right now, even as you're listening to this video. Picture yourself as a kid. Maybe you're 6, 7, or 8 years old. It's the version of you who may have already started taking care of everyone around you. And my invitation to you is to tell that kid, you don't have to work for safety anymore. You don't have to earn love by being useful. You're allowed to just be a kid. In the work that we do, what I've learned is that the younger version of ourselves oftentimes are still with us, and they're just still operating from the same old rules and roles that they were taught at that age of who they were supposed to be. And it comes up to us. And really, it's up to us to actively now step in and to tell them that it's okay to stop. They're allowed to be a kid. They're allowed to be unconditionally loved by you. What is really most important here is the reminder that you didn't choose the roles that you were brought up with. They were assigned to you by somebody who was older and should have understood what this meant. But whether or not they didn't matter. However, now you can choose whether or not to keep doing it. Because true maturity isn't actually doing everything for everyone. It's knowing what is actually yours to carry and allowing other people to do what they're here to do, carry their own burdens, and to grow in the ways that they're here to grow.